From Cask Cartel, this is the Cartel Hour. I'm Cameron Stevens.
And my name is Seth Benheim.
Together, we're tasting all kinds of spirits with master distillers, celebrity guests, and more. We're here to learn a little bit and drink a little bit. So grab a glass and let's enjoy. Welcome back to the Infusory for another episode of the Cartel Hour. My name is Cameron Stevens.
And I'm your co-host, Seth Benheim. And today, what are we drinking?
Well, we have David Whitmer with us, and we're drinking some George Remus.
From none other than MGP Distilleries.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, hello,
indeed.
guys.
Yeah, how's it going today?
It's going great, and it's great to be with you, and we'll talk a little bit about MGP and myself and George Remus.
Yeah.
The bootleggers. So
I think this is going to be fun because I know Seth knows a lot about MGP, and so he'll probably be able to ask the questions that more experienced consumers and industry folks really want to know. And for me, I'm a little bit in the camp of like, it still is a bit of an enigma. And so I'd love to, like you were saying, Seth, pull the curtain a little bit.
I'm excited to pull the curtain, and I really want to figure out. I'm going to find out real quick here what I don't know about MGP, which I'm sure is quite a bit, because you think you know, you feel all special when you run around the liquor store and you go, that's MGP and that's MGP and that's MGP. And you know,
I played that game.
Yeah, it's like mine. But, no, exactly. it's a phenomenon, and MGP is this big publicly traded company now. I don't know when it went public, but it's been publicly traded for a little bit now. And it's one of the largest producers, and maybe the largest or one of the largest producers of grain alcohol in the country. I know you guys have a chemical department. You guys do like other things like ethyl alcohols and other kinds of, is that correct?
Yeah. So for what we call our white goods or our GNS, you can use it to make vodka with, and a lot of people do bottle our GNS for vodka, but we can also sell it for industrial uses, and that's hand sanitizer, pharmaceuticals even. So yeah, we do in our Atchison, Kansas distillery. We have two distilleries, one in Atchison, Kansas, and one in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, where everything on the table in front of you was made. But at our Atchison, Kansas distillery, we do make a lot of ethyl alcohol or vodka and gin, and we even make 200 proof ethyl alcohol. So,
oh wow,
absolute alcohol, yes.
Oh wow.
Well, maybe we can take a step back a little bit, because David, I'd love to know a little bit about what you do for the company, and then maybe you can tell us a little bit about, like, maybe in your own words to somebody that doesn't really know what MGP is. How would you describe MGP?
Yeah, maybe I'll start there. And because I often say MGP is the largest distillery you've never heard of for a lot of folks. I mean, certainly people who know their whiskey and know the behind the scenes about a lot of brands know that MGP provides a lot of the liquid. And we do that with rye whiskey, particularly high rye bourbons, gin, and vodka. And we've been doing that for many years. MGP started in 1941 in Atchison, Kansas. There was a small distillery there that was actually closed. And a man named Cloud Cray Sr. came to actually dismantle the distillery and take it to Michigan. But it's 1941, the war's breaking out. And before we had a defense department, we had a war department. And they said to Mr. Cray, we need you to get this distillery up and running now, because for the war effort, we need alcohol. And so he did. And he fell in love with Atchison. Atchison's on the Missouri River in the northeast part of Kansas. And he moved his family there and started what we now know as MGP. His son, Bud, later took over, and then his son-in-law, and currently Bud's daughter, or the granddaughter of Cloud Cray Sr., is the chairperson of MGP's board. Her name is Karen Seberg. So we're publicly traded, but we're still very much a family company. And we've had some other distilleries over the years. We had one in Pekin, Illinois for many years, primarily to make gin, vodka, and that industrial alcohol I talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But then 10 years ago, we bought the Lawrenceburg, Indiana distillery.
Just 10 years ago.
Maybe it's 11 by now. Time kind of flies.
2010.
Yeah. Yeah, but it was really the progression of MGP to be more in spirits and branded spirits. We had done a lot of that with vodka. There's a lot of famous American vodkas that were started at MGP's Atchison Distillery, as well as gins, and there still are today. But Lawrenceburg, brought this unique opportunity for whiskey. In the 70s, MGP had whiskey. It had a place in Missouri as well as in Pekin, Illinois that made some whiskey. There were several whiskey warehouses in that Illinois distillery, but then we kind of hit that whiskey bust time of the 80s. And so the business model changed and no longer making whiskey. But then, and it's more, it's like people say you'd rather be lucky than good. And we did buy the Lawrenceburg, Indiana distillery before kind of the whiskey boom really started. I mean, it was starting, but
is that the distillery that was formerly the Sigrums distillery?
Yeah. So the whole lineage of that is you could go back to the 1800s, and there was the Rossville Distillery, started in 1847. Next door was a Squibb Distillery. I'll tell a little more about that Squibb Distillery later when we talk about George Remus. But Lawrenceburg became known as Whiskey City because there were several distilleries there, primarily because it's on the Ohio, a great trade route. You could bring goods in, you could put barrels on the river, ship them down the river. Of course, there's a lot of grain there. So in the grain country, grain belt, perfect. But why specifically Lawrenceburg is it sits on this vast aquifer. And when the glaciers came through millions of years ago, they carved out this cavern that fills up with water. That water is naturally filtered by sand and gravel and limestone to purify the water. But for a distiller, what was key about that aquifer is that year round, it provided a constant 56 degrees of water. And so when you're distilling, especially when you're mashing, you generate a lot of heat and you need to control that heat. And that's why, distilling in the 1800s was pretty much in the spring and in the fall. That's even how we get the seasons about for bottled and bond, the spring season or the fall season, first 6 months or the last 6 months. And nobody was distilling in the summer because it was just too darn hot. But if you had this constant 56 degree water, I mean, pre-refrigeration or cooling towers or anything, it was a godsend. And so these distillers just thought this is great. And we use that aquifer water today to cool our fermentation. There's no cooling towers at our distillery, and we can use that water, use the cooling effect of that water, and then put it right back. And so it's a really low energy way of, except for pumping it, to use that water. And like I said, it's a very clean source of water, so it's great when we're mashing and when we're cutting product as well. So that's why so many distilleries kind of sprung up in Lawrenceburg. And they kind of started to consolidate. One of the larger ones was Rossville. And it was the Rossville Distillery from 1847 all the way through Prohibition. Indiana actually enacted Prohibition 2 years before national Prohibition. And so they really had to figure out, what do I do to keep myself in business? And so they did sell a lot of industrial alcohol, grain alcohol for medicinal purposes, so to speak. And then after Prohibition, the distillery sold to Sigrums. And
the Rossville
Distillery, yes, became the Sigrums Distillery. And in the 30s, there was quite a building boom in Lawrenceburg and at that distillery. The rack houses that we use today most of them are all 6-story brick warehouses, and each story will have barrels six barrels high. And so a lot of brick, a lot of investment, and what makes Lawrenceburg just that classical looking distillery is because it is all brick. And the still house is all brick, the warehouses are all brick. You could not begin to afford to build a distillery like it today. And because of those brick warehouses, we have some kind of unique aging going on, and I'll talk about that later when we get into the George Remus brand. But then after Sigrums, and so all the classic Sigrums brands, whether it's Sigrums 7, Seagram Vodka, Seagram Gin. Most people don't know that Seagram's Gin was one of the first barrel-aged gins because it was made, the gin was made, and then they had all these used barrels, and so they would put it in the barrel for 6 months. And so if you ever pour out a little Seagram's Gin, you'll see it has a slight tint to it. And so after, in the 70s and in the 80s, Seagram's kind of fell on some hard times, primarily because Edgar Brofman of the Brofman family decided that his interests were in movies and buying studios. And there's a book called The Rise and Fall of the House of Sigrums, and it talks about how, he got handed something great and it got all messed up.
Funny.
So,
it sounds like it sounds a little bit like Corky from Peerless Distilling. You go over there and you meet with Corky, and he's like, "Oh, I'm in Hollywood. I'm a Hollywood man. I'm a movie guy. I'm a TV guy," and you're like, "But we're here in Kentucky at this beautiful distillery. Let's talk about whiskey." He's like, "No, let's talk about Hollywood." And I'm like, "What's going on?" Sounds a bit like Brofman in a way.
Yeah, it's like, know your audience. But anyway,
well, look around you. It's like, I'm from LA. I know Hollywood. I bump into people like we're surrounded by Hollywood. I'm in Kentucky. Let's talk whiskey for a second here, pal.
Yeah. So then after Seagram's fell, and there's still Seagram's brands out there, but those got all divided up. I mean, different companies, one company owns Seagram 7, another one owns Seagram's Gin, actually two own Seagram Vodka. I think Coca-Cola even got the water. And so it all kind of got split up, and it was really sad, and the distillery kind of languished, if you will. And it worked really hard at running slow. And there was the time when it was LDI, known as Lawrenceburg Distillers of Indiana. That was owned by some investment bankers. There was a time when Pernod Ricard owned the facility. It kind of went back and forth. And then when MGP bought it, it was from LDI. And there was actually the distillery and the bottling house. And at that time, MGP was focused on the distilling part and chose not to make an offer on the bottling house. Someone else bought that, even though that is still very much a part of the Lawrenceburg community.
Are these like next door to? Are they like next door to each other?
No, they're
They're close.
They're about 3/4 of a mile away. There is still a pipeline between the two in case that bottling plant would buy something from MGP. We would just send it down the pipeline, whether it be vodka, gin, or whiskey. So that's how they did. That's how they did it in the Sigrams days and even the LDI days. And now we only do it if they purchase something from MGP.
Is that a bit of a regret in hindsight to not snatch up the bottling portion as well?
Actually, when you think about 10 years ago, I would say there was an overcapacity of bottling at that time. And MGP was still figuring out how it would do its own brands and what that would be. We were very happy to recommend bottlers to people, whether it be that bottler or just other bottlers around the country. Work with a lot of them because a lot of people will come to us and say, "I want to start a whiskey brand." And it's like, great, you want to start a whiskey brand? And then that's as far as they've gotten. They don't know.
I don't think that's changed. I don't think it's gonna change.
No, I don't
think it's
so
gonna
either.
change.
Yeah, and so we would have to help them with a lot of things, including bottling.
Well, it brings us to today, right? I mean, it brings us
Exactly.
to what we have in front of us, and kind of.
Right.
I thank you for the history
Right. But
on.
I will just give a tad more. I know we're anxious to
Oh
drink,
no,
and
no,
I am
no.
too. But when we think about then the progression, and that was a great question, do you regret not buying the bottling plant? At the time, no. And then as things moved on, we did see the need for that at MGP, and that's why we're very excited about this year when we acquired Luxco. And so Luxco has a lot of bottling capacity and facilities. They got one in St. Louis, one in Ohio, and of course, two great distilleries. And so as we think about the now total MGP Luxco family, it's just very exciting. And
Yeah.
it was great to get that deal done and started this year. And so we're excited to move forward.
And for those
Amazing.
listening, we have a great series of podcasts that we did in 2020 on Luxco. You can listen to the
Three-part series, yeah.
four-part series if you count
if you
their
count El Mayor.
El Mayor Tequila.
Yeah.
Yeah. So go ahead and listen to those. We do John Rempe, and we do the Lux, Phil Lux and Don Lux.
Mhm.
We talk to Stephen Fonte from Limestone Branch Distillery, and Grace Gonzalez from El Mayor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you want to
Great.
know more about them, that's a great place to do
Yep.
it.
Go check it out.
Yeah. Yeah. I watched those. Good job, guys. So,
Well, thank you. Thank you. We had a blast doing it.
They're fun.
There's all good people.
All good product.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Good people and good product.
Yeah. So earlier I talked about, MGP being the largest distillery you've never heard of. And a lot of people, as I talk to them, I say I'm from MGP and I get that blank stare. And, but when you start talking about how you make over 90% of the rye whiskey in the, that's consumed, people start looking at you. And then if they tell you their favorite rye, chances are it did come from
us.
MGP.
It's us.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to be coy about, mentioning them, but we do have non-disclosure agreements, and they're not necessarily two-way. So if somebody buys alcohol from us, they can talk all day long that they bought it from MGP. And there's a lot of press about the people who have bought from MGP, but we don't talk about it.
Yeah,
Meaning
sometimes
bring
good,
it up, so.
sometimes bad. I mean, the press can go both
Yeah.
ways there. There's
Yeah.
people that buy it from you guys, and we don't have to get too into it, but there are people
Mhm.
that buy it from you guys, whiskey, rye whiskey, etc., and they've gotten under heat, even under lawsuit. And
Mhm.
feel free to do your own research, but you
Yeah.
can look up rye whiskey brands from Iowa and look up lawsuits that have ensued over how brands are being presented to the consumers and the general marketing practices. And then there are very well-known brands like Smoke Wagon and others that constantly will tout that they got the last 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 year barrels of from MGP. And I'd be withholding information if I didn't say that I've from my own company bought whiskey from MGP for Broken Barrel Whiskey. And if you look up our Single Oak series, you can find a few bottles that do incorporate some MGP single malt whiskey and some wheat whiskey. So on that front, I'm a customer, corporate customer of MGP's, and I'm allowed to say that I've bought whiskey from you guys, and it was all delicious stuff. One of them got 95 points, so it was a
Very good.
very highly regarded whiskey on that end. So
Yeah.
Well, so I guess my question then, I mean, because it does seem to me like this is kind of the business model. Because when you say, "Hey, I work for MGP," the reason why people don't maybe know about that is because there's no whiskey that just says MGP on it, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, am I correct in saying that this is essentially the business model? I mean, is it almost entirely contract distilling?
Not entirely,
Okay.
but that is still a big part of the business model. Of course, now with Luxco, there is the whole branded piece. But before that, MGP did decide that it would have some of its own brands. It started with a vodka, Till American wheat vodka that's made in Atchison, Kansas. But we always knew we wanted a bourbon. We're known for our high rye bourbon, and I'll get into exactly what that means here in a minute. And we had some criteria about what should our bourbon brand be. And we could have just started it organically, meaning we'll come up with a name, we'll come up with what should be in it and the story. Or we could look at someone who currently sources their bourbon from MGP and look at acquiring that brand. And there was 3 guys in Cincinnati. Cincinnati's about 20 miles from the Lawrenceburg, Indiana distillery. And they had started this very small George Remus brand. And when we heard the story, we liked the story. The fact that it was MGP liquid was great. And again, this was just a few guys putting their resources together and start a brand. So the bourbon was only a couple of years old, but they had done enough work that it was worth it. And so we bought the brand. We knew the first thing we were doing was certainly going to up the age of the bourbon and do some things that they'd always hoped to do someday, but never got. We're building the brand to do
the money for.
Well, yeah, there is that money part that holds people up sometimes.
It ain't cheap, people. It ain't cheap.
That's right. That's right. And so we were able to take that, but the MGP, plan at that time was still take it slow. We'll just be in a few states, and then next year we'll be in a few more states. And so before the Luxco acquisition, we were only in 16 states. And so with Luxco, that's going to change, enormously because they've already got this nationwide presence. And so we're very excited to take the MGP Lawrenceburg, Indiana bourbon to the masses, if you will. And that's why it's great that we're showcasing it today.
We're excited to see George Remus make its way to California, as I understand. I'm not sure if this is available here yet.
It is not yet.
Okay.
I'll just put it as yet.
I
honestly don't know when.
I'm sure we'll blink our eyes and we'll see this and many other products. Now, before we dive deeply and open up and start drinking the Remus, there are a few other brands. You mentioned the Till vodka, the George Remus. We are going to be doing another episode for those listening on the Rossville Union Rye whiskeys with MGP. You guys have a brand called 8 and Sand.
Yes, that's a blended bourbon whiskey, which sometimes gets people confused because they're used to blended whiskeys. But if you have a blend that's predominantly bourbon, then it can be called a blended bourbon whiskey.
Okay.
But people are also used to blended whiskeys having a lot of grain neutral spirits or vodka in it, and 8 and Sand does not. So 8 and Sand was a way for MGP to kind of make the combination of a lot of things we make. So it's mostly bourbon, but it contains rye whiskey, corn whiskey, and light whiskey.
Yep. Any other brands you want to mention?
And yes, and then there's one more. So MGP for decades was and still is the largest distiller of gin in North America. But we didn't have a gin brand. And what we did is we bought a small craft distillery in Washington, D.C. called Green Hat. And Green Hat was the first distillery constructed in Washington, D.C. after Prohibition. It took a long time for distilling to be acceptable or approved in D.C. And so we bought that brand and closed the 1st of March of 2020, and we all went out to the distillery. And then 2 weeks later, all things COVID hit, and we kind of put the kibosh on a lot of things. But I think we're going to talk about Green Hat on your show as well.
We are, there's going to be a third part. We're going to be interviewing their master distiller, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's actually 2 head distillers, at the distillery in DC, Green Hat, and Ian and Travers will talk to you I might just sit in the back and listen, but we'll see on that.
Oh, you are invited, my friend. You are invited.
Absolutely.
So we've gone ahead and we've poured our first glass of the George Remus 94 proof straight bourbon whiskey, and we've got a very Al Capone looking sort of gangster here on the front, the king of bootleggers. And
that's right.
Who is this gentleman?
Let's talk about the man. Let's talk about the man behind the brand here.
Okay, I tell you what. Let's try the bourbon.
Yeah.
Because we've been talking forever. So
this is a podcast after all.
Jesus.
I know.
It wouldn't be the cartel hour if we didn't get a little boozy.
So, and David, I do appreciate you being humble here, but you didn't answer one of my questions.
I did not, did I? So
you did not. And you know which question I'm referencing
repeat
to.
I do. It's like
repeat the question.
It's like, who is he and why is he here? That's kind of so again, David Whitmer, and I'm in charge of the master blenders at MGP, and I'm one of the master blenders. And we believe in the team approach. So we have a team of master distillers and a team of master blenders. And when we talk a little more about what George Remus bourbon actually is, you'll understand a little more of the blending component. So you guys are well ahead of me on nosing this.
The nose is a gorgeous nose.
And I talk about this all the time. So you guys go first.
We do not mind talking about this bourbon.
Is what we do.
Yeah.
So really, really warm, inviting, beautiful nose, no burn of alcohol whatsoever. I'm not getting any of that ethanol. It's really got a nice inviting sort of smell to it. I'm getting a little banana almost.
To me,
caramelized,
Yeah. And I definitely get, sometimes you get this really lovely kind of musky barrel characteristic. It's there's like an oak. And then there's like this feeling of being amongst the barrels. And I totally get that on the nose, which I really, really love. It's not overly sweet on the nose either.
Yeah.
No, it's undeniably got that bourbon familiarity to it. Yeah. It's beautifully balanced on that nose. Go ahead.
And it's a bigger nose for the actual proof. I mean, sometimes, you get, until you start getting up over 100 proof or something like that, you're like, if the nose isn't there, that's fine, et cetera, et cetera. But it is, it is very, very inviting, as you had said.
I do get kind of a toasted, like a roasted street nut, like a cashew almost, like sort of buttery on the front end.
Yeah.
Really nice mouthfeel. Coating really stays more on the tongue than in the gums for me. It's really latching onto the tongue. It's mildly tannic, not too sharp or it's really not uninviting in any way on the mouthfeel. It's really nice, actually.
Yeah. It finishes nice and dry. Sorry, we can go back and forth on days.
No, I love it.
What I'd really love
you guys
to
could write copy
here,
for us. Great.
That's great. What I love is it's not overly caramel. It is a really nice kind of like vanilla, desserty vanilla with a little bit of almost borderline getting into that kind of pie crust area.
Yeah, a little butterscotchy on the finish. On like that,
absolutely.
Not on the first sip, but the second and third sip get into butterscotch. It is, I'm going to say, very drinkable. I could drink quite a bit of this at room temperature, neat, doesn't need ice.
Oh, I wouldn't at the
I'm afraid to put ice to take away from the flavor, but luckily you guys have solved that issue with two of these other bottles we'll get to in a minute.
That's right,
at 121 and 126 proof. We do have some single barrel editions that we will taste in a few moments coming up. But this is a great start. I mean,
I would agree with everything you said. Sometimes on the nose, I get a little cherry in with that banana. That's just me. I get that. And then when you were talking about caramel, vanilla, I always call those the classic barrel notes. But I think why those are muted in this bourbon is because it is a high rye bourbon. And, a lot of people talk about high rye bourbon and they top out at about 18% rye. And at MGP, at the Lawrenceburg Distillery, we make two main bourbons, and one which we call 21% rye. So it's 75% corn, 21% rye, and 4% barley malt. And then another one that we call 36% rye. So it's 60% corn, 36% rye, 4% barley malt. And when we decided that this would be our brand, we really didn't want to pick one of those mash bills. And so what you're drinking is actually a combination of those two mash bills.
Okay.
Mhm.
I should have totally gone with my gut on this because I get that rye on the nose. I do.
Mhm.
And I also think the rye helps like really kind of clean out this mouthfeel. Like sometimes bourbons can finish a little bit sweeter than you really want them to. And
Mhm.
it just grips the back of the tongue really nicely. And it's not an oak forward. I mean, this isn't big barrel on this. And I do think it has to be
Mhm.
that rye that's giving that grippiness to the palate.
It's a
Yeah.
really medium low sweetness. It's not
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not on the sweeter side of bourbons.
Right.
And that high rye, both of those, considerably high rye, 21% rye, 36% rye. Now, is it an
Mhm.
even? Are you guys going even on this? Is it 3-2? Is it...
It's really depending on the barrels we dump. And so when we first came up with it, what you're trying is the profile. And to achieve that profile, it could be anywhere from 25-75 and then 50-50 or inverse. It really depends a little bit on the barrels.
Do the
And you're gonna
batches change or do they stay consistent?
the batches will always be 21 or 36, but the years will be different. The warehouses they were in were slightly different.
Yeah.
And so we're actually going to get to see the difference in the two barrel proof single barrel bottles, because I purposely had a 21 and a 36 sent to you guys. So you're going to get to try both mash bills separately.
Okay. So one's
Love
one
it.
and one's the other.
Yeah, and maybe I won't tell you till we're done. Maybe we'll make a game
Test
out of
us.
it.
I
So
love
we'll
it.
No,
see.
that's a lot of fun. I like that.
And they're close and proof, and so we'll have some fun when we get to those single
Absolutely.
barrels in a little bit. Yeah.
One of the other things I'd love for you to talk a little bit about is the fact that this, as a somewhat entry level to this line, is still also non-chill filtered, and I love that.
Mhm.
What was the decision there? And what do you guys feel you gain from doing non-chill filtered?
As we've talked to bourbon drinkers, whiskey drinkers, it, except for water, there's always people that want everything to be barrel proof, and that's okay. But not everybody's ready for that. And as close as you can get to the product being right out of the barrel is exactly what we wanted to provide. And at 94 proof, there's always the concern about, okay, there might be that tad bit of kind of fluffy sediment on the bottom that might be off-putting. But yet, if people know anything about whiskey, they know it's there. At 94 proof, that really isn't going to happen. Maybe if you chilled it for a really long time, it might. That's the main reason people chill filter, is for cosmetic reasons, because they don't want someone going down the liquor store shelf and seeing this cloudy fuzz at the bottom of a barrel or bottle, and people thinking it's somehow contaminated or the bottle didn't get clean before it was filled. And so, but yeah, entry level, but yet still want to give a nod to the people who know about whiskey, who know about bourbon, and experience it right out of the barrel just with some water.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And as we talk about the man, we didn't really get into who George Remus,
No,
the
this is a
son of
perfect,
Cincinnati,
yeah, this
to
is a
call
perfect
him
time to do that.
a bootlegger is to just say Hemingway was a writer.
Yeah, so exactly. So
uh,
like you said, you pointed out this guy on the bottle, and George Remus was a real person. He immigrated to the United States in the late 1800s with his family from Germany, and they eventually settled in Chicago. His uncle was already in Chicago and had a pharmacy, and George Remus started working in the pharmacy. And at age 19, George became a licensed pharmacist. And at age 21, he took over his uncle's pharmacy. And he quickly got bored and decided to go to law school. And at age 24, George Remus became an attorney. And this is 1900. And he's a practicing attorney in Chicago. And his biggest claim to fame between 1900 and 1920 is he was one of the first attorneys in the United States to attempt to use the insanity defense to get one of his clients off the hook. There was a big famous murder in a fancy hotel in Chicago, and he tried to use the fact that his client had temporarily gone insane to get him off the hook. It didn't work, but he was one of the first to try it. And then in 1920, George Remus gets this whole new set of clients, which of course are bootleggers. And he's amazed by these guys. And he says two things about them. He says, they're loaded. He said, they get caught, they come in, they pull wads of cash out of their pocket, pay their fines and move on and keep bootlegging. But the other thing he said about them is that they're idiots. And so he decided that he could make prohibition work for him. He studied the Volstead Act, the act that gave us prohibition. And of course, the biggest loophole in the Volstead Act is that you could sell medicinal alcohol.
That's right.
And so he moved from Chicago to Cincinnati. And he moved to Cincinnati because he was within a few hundred miles of all the shuttered whiskey warehouses. You know, we have this misconception about prohibition that all the whiskey in the United States was dumped. You know, we've all seen that photo where the revenuers are standing over the drain and the barrels going down the drain. That didn't happen. I mean, it did for publicity shots, but the whiskey that you owned was your personal property. You just couldn't sell it. That was the same with the whiskey in all these warehouses. It was just sitting there. And you could get a permit to remove that alcohol for medicinal purposes. And that's exactly what George Remus did. And he did that for just a little while, and he realized he could make a lot more money bootlegging in addition to this medicinal route. And so the system he worked out is he would get these permits. Sometimes he obtained them lawfully, sometimes he obtained them through bribes, and some of his permits were just forgeries. But what he would do is he would execute a permit at one of these distilleries, load up the truck with barrels, and then he'd have some of his own men hijack that truck, and then rough up the guys a little bit, and then he could claim he got robbed and could execute the same permit again to get more whiskey out of the warehouse, while all this time he's funneling that whiskey to a farm just outside of Cincinnati, where he bottled the product and soon became known as Death Valley Farm, because it had a long kind of windy driveway and lane and a lot of trees for cover. And if you didn't know the sequence of flashing your lights, you might get the tires taken out by a sniper or even the driver.
Whoa.
And so that's how it got the name Death Valley Farm. I mentioned earlier the Squibb Distillery in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. George Remus bought that distillery, put his brother-in-law in charge of that distillery. And from an aerial view, you can still see where some of those warehouses that he pulled whiskey out existed. Those were different kind of structures, built in the 1800s, and they don't exist anymore. But we have that property. And so in addition to, when I talked about the brand being pulled from MGP, there was this tie to at least our distillery campus, George Remus. And so George Remus, he starts making a lot of money. I mean, at one time, George Remus is controlling 35% of all the liquor moved in this country during Prohibition.
My God.
And the money kind of went to his head. And he bought a big mansion in Cincinnati. he started referring to himself in the third person, meaning George Remus says this is good bourbon. And he proclaimed himself king of the bootleggers. And he threw big parties because he was a poor kid and he grew up poor and he wanted people to know him and respect him. And so he threw these big parties, and his parties is where we get the stereotype of lighting a cigar with a $100 bill.
Well, tell me, you guys have the right to the film for this.
Yeah,
where's the movie?
Where's the Hollywood?
Well, you know, I'm getting there, and so and at one of his parties there were $1,000 bills under the plates, and at another party he gave every man in attendance a diamond lapel stick pin, and all the women were like, "Well, that's great. What do we get?" And pretty much on cue, as they were probably making this disappointed look, all the servants come out with platters with little boxes, and every woman opened the box, and there was a set of keys. And outside, lining the driveway and all the adjacent streets, were brand new cars.
Jeez.
So I call George Remus the first Oprah, because you got a car and you got a car and you got a car. Yeah. And so you could imagine that people wanted to get to know this guy, George Remus, and you wanted to get invited to a party. And as legend has it, one of the people that became an acquaintance and a friend of George Remus was F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Mm-hmm.
And the legend then is that Remus was the inspiration for Gatsby. In The Great Gatsby.
I was going to say our thing was quite Gatsby.
Yeah, which is why the Remus Repeal Reserve bottle doesn't look like your typical bourbon bottle.
No, it's very Art
Deco, Roaring 20s look and feel to it. And I think you guys are probably on to this bourbon now anyway.
Yes,
so.
we have poured ourselves a sample of, I believe, the 4th Repeal series. At the very neck label, you can see which one we're on.
Yeah.
This is the 2020 medley, 77%, 2008, 21% rye, and 23%. So there's your ratio. 2008, 36% rye. Is that to say this was a 12-year?
Yep.
A blend? Wonderful.
Yeah. So what I didn't talk about when we talked about the 94 proof is the bourbons in this are 5 to 7 years old.
Got it. Yep.
And 21 and 36.
An absolute sweet spot for all bourbon.
Yeah. And then we wanted to use some of our older bourbon for our annual release. And so you're right, this is series 4 that came in 2020. Mm-hmm. And on purpose, each year, those combinations of bourbons change. This is where I get to have fun as a blender. You know, I'm not trying to match a profile. It just has to be good. Yeah. And we wanted to be, like we were transparent with the non-chill filtered on the 94 proof. We wanted to be perfectly transparent on this one by not only telling you the mash bill of the bourbon and the percentage of the bourbon and the year of the bourbon. So you know everything that's in this at 100 proof.
The transparency resonates with me quite a bit. I'm all about transparency, and I love that in a brand. So this is really, really great to see that. And you know, to me, this seems already highly collectible that you have a series, a changing mash bill. I mean, this pulls at all the strings that a bourbon collector, you know, is looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's try this, and I'll tell you a little story about this series. So.
You want to start?
I have plenty to say.
All right.
It does still pull at me with that nice kind of perfumey muskiness on the nose that I very, very much like. It's one of those things where it stands out on its own as a, you know, something that you can pick up off of the nose, but it also sort of enhances everything around it. So it kind of lifts up the little bit of extra sweetness. I think this is a bit sweeter, in my opinion. Than the other. I also get more barrel on it than the 94. And so in that range, they're similar but different. And I think what's really happening here is the age is pulling out that oak. right?
Yeah,
Inevitably
yeah.
sitting longer, you're going to get that. But at the same time, I also think the age has kind of smoothed it out. So this is a
Mm-hmm.
much more well-rounded palate. This just sits kind of right in the cheeks and right on the front of the tongue, whereas the last one kind of hit straight to the back and was a little
Mm-hmm.
bit like that dry finish. So I love the body on this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my thoughts. Seth, what do you think?
I'm glad you took the time to say that, because I was thinking before speaking, which sometimes I speak and then I'm thinking as I'm talking. So the notes are going to flow more fluidly here. Apple pie, baked apple, just big baking spice, rye spice
Yeah.
coming
Mm-hmm.
through. You
Mm-hmm.
get the Luxardo cherry sweet notes, and then you
Yep.
have this sort of caramel apple thing happening. There is a sweetened fruit element to it.
Yes.
All of it is deeper, richer, and
Mm-hmm.
just more robust. The thickness of this whiskey far outweighs the previous one. So if I was at, say, an A minus ish on the first one, I would knock it down after having tasted this one, saying, "Man, this is the A range version of the one before it. It really
Mm-hmm.
it highlights how much thinner at 94 proof and younger years
Mm-hmm.
the regular Remus is relative to this one. It just brings those notes to a whole nother level
Yeah.
from
Yeah,
a sugar
nice.
content balance with a spice content, with a mouthfeel and a finish length. The thickness of this whiskey is commendable, and I don't know who the blender was, but man, he did a good job. Oh, wait, there he is.
Oh,
Somebody get
yeah.
this guy out of here. He's been drinking.
Well, yeah, well, I'd love to, anytime that I get a chance to talk directly to either somebody that's directly involved in distilling, or
Mm-hmm.
in some instances, I kind of find the blending process even that much more fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that you can share with us in terms of your creative thought process, especially when you're going to design, a specialty release, one that you're changing year after year? When you go into it, like, do you have a certain mental state that you like to go for, or is it more creative, free flowing? How do you think about that?
It is certainly more freeing on the repeal because you're not necessarily trying to be consistent. So when you're blending for the 94 proof, once you do it the first time, it needs to be that way every time.
Yeah.
So you're going to pull barrels, we're going to put those barrels together, and it needs to achieve this profile. When we're talking about the yearly release of Remus Repeal Reserve, it's whatever. And the first year we did this, series one, is the geekiness in me wanted people to just observe the difference in age. And so series one is at 94 proof. So you would compare the 94 proof that's 5 to 7, and you could compare the almost 11-year-old series one at 94 proof, and you would just know the difference of age. And I thought, oh, that's a cool thing. You don't rarely get to do that.
It's levers.
And,
You're pulling
yeah,
levers.
yeah. And series one got a lot of great accolades, press, people liked it. There was always one negative comment. And the consistent negative comment was, well, I wish it was a little higher proof. And my thought is anybody can do proof. I can sell moonshine and it'd be high proof. I can be a startup and do high proof. May not be any good, but I can still do high proof. So I know people like high proof, and I'm not saying high proof is bad, but I listen to them, we listen to them, and I understand that if you are going to pay more for a limited release, then let's move up the proof a little bit. And so series 2 was 100. We toyed with, should series 3 be 101? But then if you do that, then it's like, well, is it always going to go up? And we just landed that it would always be 100. So that's why series 2, 3, and 4 are, and 5 will also be 100.
Got it.
Question for you on batch size. How many barrels per batch?
So it really depends on how many bottles we're going to try to move through the country. And I told you we were probably initially like in 6, 7 states when we did Series 1, and then by the time through last year we were in 16 states. And so at 10 or more years, we're probably going to lose about half of what's in that barrel. So it's still about less than 100 barrels.
Yeah, and here's the crazy thought. We talked in the beginning of the podcast about all these products that use your guys' whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
And to a degree, some of those brands have reached such recognition, such acclaim that there's so many people talking about those brands. Some of those brands have been acquired for tens or hundreds of millions of dollars using your guys' whiskey. And here you are putting it out, your own whiskey. And I don't mean this in a negative way, but I belong to blogs and groups and stuff, and it's not the number one thing you see on people's radar. And I mean that to say, why aren't more people raving about you guys and you, David, specifically, the man who's made and blended so much of this whiskey? Why are they not talking about this more? And is it just a marketing?
Is that by design?
Is that by design, or is this a marketing opportunity that is untapped for you guys? Is this something that was waiting for the Luxco acquisition to really exploit the distribution and availability of these products? Because here we are drinking a 12-year, and I actually looked up the price on this, and I'll tell you guys now. It's about $90, right? Roughly.
Yeah, suggested retail is usually $84.99.
84, 84.90, maybe.
Whatever the markup is, depending on the market.
States vary, but
yeah.
Here's a bottle of 12-year-old MGP. 100% of it's 12 years old, right? And it's drinking beautifully. It's delicious, and this is an A product for me. And I'm sitting there, and I'm seeing bottles half or 1/3 less in age of this stuff, not rebottled and repackaged by someone else.
Yep.
And the prices are going crazy. Crazy. Hundreds of dollars a bottle. Hundreds. And secondary market, and people are going, waiting in line in the morning for these things. It's like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, here it is from the source.
Yeah.
It's like someone trying to sell you Coca-Cola, and they go, no, I don't, whatever, it's Coca-Cola. And then someone else buys that Coca-Cola and calls it, something cola, and then you're going to pay 3 times as much. It's like, what?
Yeah.
Dude, it's right there.
As I've explained it to several people who've asked a very similar question, and I completely understand the question, is that as a brands company, MGP was still a startup, and it was purposely taking it slow. And we did that for several years. And obviously with the Luxco purchase, the whole idea is to help accelerate that. And whether that's with the traditional Luxco brands or the brands now that Luxco has to work with from Lawrenceburg or Atchison.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll put this up against so many things that we've had on the podcast and say this can go easily toe to toe.
And it's really, I love that it's at 50%. It's right in that sweet spot. I've told Cameron a number of times, 100 to 110 is really where I'm finding the whiskeys I love and cherish the most really fall in that range. There are some real high proof things that I would go, oh my God, I got a 68% Jack Daniels that it doesn't drink like that. It's awesome. It's great. It's one of those single barrel, gold label, whatever's. But it's the age is there. The quality of everything you guys do and everything we all know and love, whether we recognize as MGP or not, it's all in this bottle. And the story behind it, the Gatsby design because Remus was the inspiration for Gatsby in theory here. Unconfirmed or confirmed that is 100% true.
It's more of a legend. If you go to the Seelbach Hotel in Louisville, they will tell the story that Remus and Fitzgerald actually met and talked at the bar. Remus actually had a distillery in Louisville. It was the Rugby Distillery.
The Rugby Distillery.
The Rugby Distillery, yeah. And then Fitzgerald had been in and around Louisville. There was a time when he was in the Army. He was stationed not far from there, although that would have been at a different time. Some people say, well, because of that, Fitzgerald wasn't there. It's like, well, it's not like people didn't travel. And so, but when you understand the story, and it is well documented about the type of parties and gifts that Remus gave away. Let's say they never met. He certainly read about that.
Yeah, that
certainly
understood
travel,
like he would hear
exactly.
Exactly.
It's a writer's gold mine.
Exactly.
Yeah, if you are writing in New York and you still hear about somebody in Cincinnati giving cars away during Prohibition and kind of in the Depression as well, then that's going to pique your interest. And so, yeah.
Okay, Seth, you're pouring one of the single barrel picks, which we're still trying to leave unknown as to the mash bill. Is that
we don't know?
Playing that game?
Yeah, well,
does not say.
Let's play that game. No,
let's
it does
play
not
that
say.
game.
We're 100% playing that game.
Yeah. So, whenever you come out with a brand, the first thing people want to know is, when can we do a barrel pick? And it's like, whoa, hang on. We just started this brand. And because George Remus bourbon is a combination of two different mash bills, it took us a little while to kind of get our heads around how are we going to deconstruct this, because a single barrel is a single mash bill. And so we thought about that, and as we offered them to people, they were offered to them blindly, kind of like you are tonight, and they didn't know if their favorite was a 21 or a 36. And it was kind of fun to watch, because some people are adamant that this has got to be the 21. It's like, no, it's not. But so I think we'll taste this one, talk about it, taste the other one, talk about it, and then you can guess. I mean, you got to.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave a little in my glass, because I feel like I feel like I can do this, but I feel like I can only do this if I can really have them like side by side.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the way to do it.
One of the things I'd love to know a little bit more about is, especially when you were talking about the kind of the history of MGP and the things that it kind of started specializing in. It sounds like rye is a big part of that. I guess my question is then, why the fascination with rye, especially as there were times in history where rye fell out of flavor? And luckily, I think I can confidently say that rye is very in favor at the moment, and rightly so, because it's a hell of a grain, and it really does bolster a lot of these products. So where's the fascination with rye come from?
So I think we can, when we look at the history of Rossville and Squibb, they all made what back then they used to call a pure rye. And so those distilleries in that area had rye. Of course, we know about the rye from the New England states. We know about Maryland rye. We know about Pennsylvania rye. And when we think about the classic cocktails, they were all designed around having a strong rye backbone, whether that was generally a rye whiskey. And so when we think about a high rye bourbon, that's why we're up there above the normal 18, 19% that most people top out at. There is a really practical reason why most bourbons top out at 18, and why most people who make a rye whiskey kind of stop at about 53, 54%, is because rye as a grain in a distillery is very hard to work with. Compared to corn, compared to wheat, compared to barley, rye is a very sticky grain. And if you make any whiskey on any large scale, you have to deal with the spent grain. So in all grain, there's carbohydrates or starch, and we're going to turn that starch into sugar and then to alcohol, but we don't use the protein. The protein goes away. That's why if I were to show you a map of Lawrenceburg, Indiana from the 1890s when it was Whiskey City, in between every distillery, there was a cattle lot because they would just move that spent grain, that slop, to the cattle. And I always got to think those were the happiest cattle on earth because it wasn't, there was some alcohol in that. So, but anyway, now we dry it. And that rye grain that's very sticky in the protein, you've got to be able to deal with that. And MGP has really perfected and spent capital to make high rye bourbons and really high rye whiskeys, even 100% rye whiskeys that we make, and deal with that spent grain. And so that's a lot of it, why other people don't do it. But it's also a little bit of that Sigrums legacy. If you think about Sigrums and having distilleries in Canada and known for Canadian rye, they really brought that passion with them to their US distilleries. And so the Lawrenceburg distillery has just always used rye and had a passion for rye. Yeah, we'll make some wheated bourbons, but just a few times a year. Our core is high rye bourbons and rye whiskey.
I'm going to recommend just out of the gate that if you do find yourself with a bottle of single barrel, you let it sit for a minute. Because on my first nose of the 121.1 proof, pure alcohol.
Yeah.
And now I've actually done a couple of, I've deployed a few of my tricks.
Yeah.
Right? The first is to breathe that ethanol in and then spit it out or blow into the glass.
My trick is the different glass. So I've used these for the first two, kind of like you've had, and then I use these more open top brandy.
And we have a couple of those
for barrel proof. You don't have to do it that way, but it does help kind of get that away, because after we go from 94 to 100 and then boom, we're at 121, it is kind of a hit. So you're right.
What I've done is I've let them sit for a minute as well. And now I haven't tasted either.
Okay.
The nose is really opened up, especially on the first one I poured, the 121. That ethanol gone, and what's coming through are all kinds of sensations. Cameron, what are you thinking? What you know which one's which?
I feel like I'm starting to get there.
I'm just going to say
the good news is I got a 50-50 shot.
Well, I've got a 50-50 shot because I'm going to say the opposite of whatever you say. So if you guess one way, I'll guess the other, and therefore either I'm a genius or I'm an idiot. Well, let's judge them on their merit first, and then figure out what they are.
Yeah.
I mean, what are we just going to refer to these as the 121 and
the 121 and the 126?
Yeah.
Now, where can customers find single barrel Remus?
Well, right now, that would still be in the 16 markets, 16 states that we were in.
To name a few, I mean, obviously you're available in Indiana, right?
So we're talking about Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, Kentucky, Missouri, Kansas, Texas, Arizona, Colorado, Nebraska. So you can kind of tell by the states I mentioned.
Nothing on the coast.
Exactly. Well, centered around where we had our distilleries.
Yeah.
Except after we picked up the Green Hat Distillery in DC, you could also get these in Virginia and Maryland and DC. So a little bit of the East Coast.
Yeah, Maryland.
Yeah.
Maryland, DC is I'm actually going to make it out to those markets finally.
But now we're expanding that. So.
Yeah, I'd love to see these in Florida, California, New York. Big cities.
That's right.
They're ready for. I mean,
that's right.
They're shell. I'll tell you right now, those cities are shelling out top dollar for MGP products, and it ain't these bottles. So
I understand.
Okay. As my friend group says when we're trying to guess something.
Okay.
Are you locked and loaded? Because you can't change your answer, Seth.
Okay.
So are you locked and loaded?
I haven't even tried the second. I haven't even smelled the second one. The second
Come
one's
on,
still
man.
airing.
Wait, we don't have that much time.
All right.
Like, get it out there.
I think David's got to tell us to put our heads down, put our hand up if we think the first one is the higher rye or the lower rye. The 121.
So let's go with the 121. Raise your hand.
Let me try the second one first.
Okay,
I want to.
all right.
You want to make a last minute change?
I haven't even tasted this thing yet.
Come on, you should know from the nose.
Says you. Okay. Gets it wrong flat.
Come on. Locked and loaded.
I love his confidence.
This is a good time for anyone to hop on over to YouTube and check out my miserable attempt at the world's top whiskey taster for the Bardstown. That was hysterical.
Now I really wish I would have sent you 3 bottles, and then it would have been not so.
Just don't do it on Rossville, because man, this is bringing back memories of that tasting competition where I
love how I'm going back and forth between over 120 proof stuff. I'm just like, a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Okay, I'm tasting this. I'm going. I think I know. Okay. Heads down.
Heads down.
All right.
Heads down.
All right. So the 121.6 proof, the first one, if you think that's the 21% rye, raise your hand.
My eyes are closed. I can't see if Cameron's raising his hand.
Neither one of you raised your hand.
No, I didn't raise mine.
Okay, so.
Okay, we've already. Now you just said it. I think this bottle is the low rye. I think this is the high rye.
Okay.
Oh no, opposite.
Opposite. You think the opposite.
So you think the opposite.
I think the 121.
Great. Who is right?
121. I said is the 30 is the lower or the higher.
You think this is the high rye, and I think this is the low rye. I think this is the high rye right here. All right. Okay. Who's right?
Cameron's right.
Yeah! Damn it. I felt here's why. I felt the 126 was sweeter.
See, that caught me because I agree with you on that note. That caught me as well.
It's really sweet, right?
It's the nose. It's the nose all the way. It's more rye on the nose. But it is true. It is a bit more of a well-rounded sweet. Like it did sort of confuse me when I went to the second one because I had the nose on the first and I'm like, there's not as much rye there as like I was getting more rye like off of this. And when I went to the second one, it was just like poof, it was that lovely, again, this like perfumey, musky rye note that I was like, it's gotta be that. It's gotta be that.
Yeah.
If I went off the smoothness of it.
Yeah. If I was knowing that if I would have known before we were truly going to play a game, I probably would have made sure they were the exact same proof or really close to it. But because 4.5 proof can tip you just a little bit. And the fact that the higher rye was the higher proof. But anyway.
Well, you would have thought the higher rye. Well, I guess that the higher proof was the lower rye, was my guess. And you would imagine that the higher proof would have more of a spicy, high alcohol bite to it that could be misconstrued as rye spice. But no, I mean, here's my thought though.
You tell me your thought.
My thought is I like the reserve maybe better than both of these. And I'm still deciding which of these I like better, but the reserve, your blending, David, is phenomenal. I think it really showcases and highlights the skill that you have brought to the mash bills and the age statements and those things. These still drink a little younger, and the depth, the richness, the thickness of that Repeal.
Yeah, there's no like of that like deep brandied note that you get from the
brandy note is great. The Luxardo cherries, you know.
Yeah. Now, in fairness to the single barrels are 5.5, 6 year old.
Right.
So if we're going to come back to the Repeal, we've got double the age. So
these are less expensive products. These are not as expensive as the Repeal.
Absolutely.
reserve.
I mean, what I had to look it up. Their suggested retail like $59.99 on those.
Wow.
That's pretty darn
Single
good
barrels.
for a single barrel and the proof. I have to say, if I had to choose one of the two, I did actually like the higher proof one better. I felt it was a little bit more complex.
Yeah.
What are you laughing for?
If these were in smoke wagon bottles, they'd be like $900 a bottle. Because there's some
How
cow.
are you telling me I can pay $60 and get 126 proof single? I mean, that's insanity.
No, but like if
Yeah.
you go online and you see like a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old smoke wagon with a red wax seal on it, you're gonna pay $900 fucking for this thing, and it's the same shit. And it's like not shit like bad. Like this is the same juice. Like it's the same thing. And the audacity of that really rocks me to my core, as you know, from my marketing and sales side of my brain. Is like, are you shitting me? Like I should be stocking up on this stuff and just putting it in, not even drinking it though, you know, could bring one out to drink and drink it, you know, often, but put 10 of these in the garage, because these are going to be like Wellers and other things in 5 years. We're going to be laughing about how we were, you know,
remember when they just sent us George
casually
Remus?
casually and like cavalierly drinking George Remus like it was water. And it's going to become this like people listening to this, like, go stock up. Like, what are you doing? This is the same exact juice from the source. Period.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. What I did notice is the fact that you kept going back and forth. You certainly weren't hesitant to go back and forth, meaning at 121 and 126, it's still pretty darn smooth.
Oh,
and the way you were just tipping
David,
them back, it was like no problem,
David,
right?
We drink very strong
we
booze.
are
Okay, yeah.
self-professed. We are those people that do say, hey, if you can get us at barrel strength, please send it to us at barrel strength.
Yeah.
We are those people that very much enjoy it. But I will say, Seth, I did think that once the initial ethanol kind of did kind of burn off, they were both easy to sip and to enjoy. And of course, at that proof, you're going to get some alcohol warming, but it's a very it's an enhancing.
I was talking today about Barton's 1792 full proof. I was having a conversation with a colleague, and he and I were discussing the flavors are there, but the proof is very, at 62.5, it's very hot.
It's distracting.
It's a hot whiskey.
Yeah.
And so many great whiskeys are, you know, my favorite 1792 is some of the stuff that's in the low 50s. And ultimately, that's maybe part and parcel with why I like this Remus so much, is because it is at 50% 100 proof that I really get an enjoyable. I mean, look, the Scotch whiskey producers will drink a Scotch all the way down to 20% 40 proof. They'll drink it all the way down to 20% 40 proof to understand the characteristics and flavor components of that whiskey. They're never going to bottle it. They cannot bottle it at 40 proof. It's got to be 40% 80 proof at a minimum. But they drink it down to that proof to understand the complexities and dynamics of what's in that barrel, to truly understand the whiskey and all the notes that exist at every proof, even proof that you're not getting when you buy the product. But maybe you add water, maybe you add ice, maybe you cocktail it, and it ends up being at that proof. Are there undesirable flavor components that start to arise at a lower proof that are lower than 40% 80 proof? Right. And so it's very interesting to find the right proof for a whiskey. I mean, I know, David, you said anyone can do proof, but doing proof right and doing proof
absolutely. Yeah.
There's an art. There is an art.
Yeah. My point was anybody can do high proof. Just to say high proof and be macho and let's do high proof. But certainly when you're blending, you have to know what's the proof you're going to bottle at. You have to know that. But similar,
the TTB has to know that.
Well, yeah, but you also have to know it when you blend it. But when we, first of all, evaluate new distillate, so when it comes right off the still before it's in a barrel, we do evaluate it at 40 proof. And that's because you're really looking for faults, because if there's a fault, you're going to detect it, and then you could choose maybe not to barrel it. That rarely happens, but you could do that. And then as you do barrel surveys, so barrels sit there for 4 or 5 years and you go out and pull them, you do want to see kind of what they are at that lower proof first, and then move up to what you think you're going to barrel them at. So you want to take notes at all those different proofs. And that also compensates a little bit for if somebody is going to put ice with it and it melts over time. You certainly don't want anything objectionable come out, or something that you hadn't really thought about as you put it together neat. Because I drink everything neat anyway. And so, but I have to think about, if people are going to dilute this a little bit, or even in a cocktail, you want the other elements of the cocktail to shine through, but you still want that solid high rye bourbon backbone there with it. So
talk to us,
look at all those.
A little bit about the Remus Volstead Reserve. And
sure,
it's not something we're going to drink today because we're running out of time, but just for the listeners, there's one more product in the Remus arena that's not on the table.
We'll show it to the camera.
Yeah, I'll show it a different way.
Oh,
he's got one.
Oh, there you go. That's a one up. If there was one.
It's a really
started in the box.
It's got a box.
and then you open the box.
Lambo doors on it.
Yeah, exactly. And so to commemorate the 100-year anniversary of the start of Prohibition, so 2020, we came out with our Remus Volstead Reserve. I mentioned that, Remus studied the Volstead Act, where he found the loophole of the medicinal alcohol.
Yep.
And so this was our 14-year-old bottled and bond bourbon to commemorate the start of Prohibition and really what started George Remus. I mean, without Prohibition, George Remus would just be another defense attorney that also owned a pharmacy in Chicago and held the record for a long time about the polar bear plunge in Lake Michigan. That was about it with him, which he did. And so this was our way to nod not only the start of Prohibition, because who really cares about the fact that we had Prohibition, but it certainly started the story and all things about George Remus. So this was limited. The repeals are limited too. I mean, this is certainly a limited release. We don't believe in so limited you can't find it, or the only way to find it's on the secondary market. But we do say when you see them, buy them, because you come back to the store, they might be gone. This sold out immediately. Let's see, did we? Yeah, we numbered these. There were 6,000 bottles.
That's a nice amount.
And that was it. Again, in those same 16 states that we were in.
For those listening that can't, obviously we always recommend everyone listening to check out our YouTube. We do post these on YouTube, and there are videos. You can see us and what we're drinking, see our ugly mugs. But that Volstead Reserve bottle has got this sort of almost trophy-like.
Yes.
Well, it also has the Art Deco theme.
That same nod with the
Empire State Building, like
exactly.
New York to me. I don't know. It feels like very like New York.
Yeah. Now, we didn't do it. We didn't do it with this bottle, but if you notice on your Repeal bottle, because George Remus was a pharmacist and attorney, we have documents with his actual signature. So you will see in the cork his signature.
Oh yeah.
And then as well as in the base of the bottle.
Oh, there it is. I didn't even check the base.
So look down this way instead of from the bottom. Look at like this. And then you'll see his actual, you'll see the signature, not backwards that way. So
oh, you look at it from
there. Yeah.
That's genius. The way
so just the fun little things we've done with George Remus and Prohibition.
There's no stone unturned in the thought behind the brand, the bottle, the man, the story. I'm certainly excited for part 2 of this whole thing with Rossville Union and the story behind that distillery and its history.
So we're going to talk about another George, because it was George Ross that started the Rossville Distillery. And when we talk about Green Hat, just by chance, we're also going to talk about another George Cassidy, the man in the green hat who supplied Congress with their alcohol during Prohibition.
We'll
Of
talk about
course, of course.
George of the Jungle and George Costanza will join us in the show.
That's right.
No, it's great. This has been wildly educational. I think for those that were like, oh, these guys just drink whiskey and talk about it. Here's your history lesson, people.
Yeah.
Here is your view into one of those really fascinating stories. Really, great education on Prohibition, great education on, what went into this brand. You guys, for the brands you could have acquired, and I didn't know that Remus was an acquired brand today. So
it was only a few years old. So, and it was only in the greater Cincinnati area. People knew about it, and we were it was kind of
my advice. My advice as a humble collector is stock up. STFU.
Yeah,
stock the fuck up.
Single barrels. Especially on those single barrels. Follow this.
Yep.
Check it out as it releases, but God, before they raise the price on this, buy some.
I think the price on this is very market friendly because these are going to be like single stores. You're not going to see 20 stores in a 10-mile radii, like just all offering single barrels at different prices. The single barrels are going to be few and far between. It's these products that, grab a Remus for every day, grab a Repeal Reserve, or if you can find where you start seeing them on the shelf, collect the various series.
Right.
Absolutely.
Having that collection is obviously a cool thing, but very, very unique. And I think, to my knowledge, this stuff is still extremely under the radar. This is not some of the stuff that people are really focusing on right now. And that's, that their problem.
That's to your advantage. For probably not that much longer.
Yeah. And thank you both for helping change that. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, honestly, like you said, Seth, this has been a blast of a podcast. We're super excited to have you on again. But before we leave here, David, is there anything else? We touched so much on George Remus. Is there anything else, any other stories or any other fun things that we didn't quite get to touch on so far?
No, that's a lot of it. Just the fact that, when you think about Prohibition and probably the nasty stuff that people drank. I mean, we often think about moonshiners and just rock
bathtub gin,
all that junk. And then here comes along this guy who figured out, how can I get aged whiskey? I mean, this would have been pre-World War I whiskey, just sitting in warehouses doing nothing. And whatever you think about Prohibition, whatever you think about bootlegging, he was just a smart guy. But here's the interesting thing about George Remus, is he didn't drink.
Really?
He'd throw all these.
Bury the lead. Bury the lead, man.
He'd throw these huge parties. God. He'd let everybody get toasted, and he would retire to his study and read a book while everybody else was partying.
Well, there you go, kids. Read a book.
He was focused on the money.
You know it. He was. Yeah.
Didn't get high on his own supply. That's
right.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
Well, David.
Wait a minute. Did Gatsby drink?
Yeah, you always had the martini.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Old sport.
Well, I would say that was more.
Okay, that's a creative, artistic license there.
I would say that was more of an influence of Fitzgerald, from what I've read about him. So
that guy drank. We definitely know that.
You mean Tobey Maguire was not the right, Leonardo DiCaprio was not the right representation of the great
well, he was probably a little better looking than Remus. So.
Remus has that what's it called? What's the HBO?
Oh,
Boardwalk Empire.
No,
so
not that guy. Story-wise, yes, but the look of Remus is more Sopranos.
Exactly.
He looks like a soprano. He looks like Tony Soprano.
Now, if you do watch Boardwalk Empire in season 2, George Remus is a character.
Oh, really?
But yes, but because of the fact that he, talked about himself in the third person or the first person, George Remus says this, George Remus says that, it kind of made him come off like a doofus. But we know he was a very smart man. And so kind of how he was portrayed, I don't know how historically accurate that was, because they kind of played off the fact that he always referred to himself in the third person, like he was.
They didn't mention the give away a car to everyone at the party kind of a deal.
No, yeah. But they did know that if you wanted good whiskey, you went to Remus.
There you
because
go.
he had the aged whiskey to sell.
May we all be
that's still the case today. If you want the good stuff, go to Remus. So.
That's right.
May we all be as stupid and fortunate enough to give away cars because we just don't know what to do with that money, right?
That's right.
That's all,
right.
I hope we're all as stupid as Remus, right? As Boardwalk
right.
Empire portrayed him.
That's right.
David, thank you for the time today. Thank
Absolutely.
you for the education and the incredible whiskeys you provided us with today. And we can only imagine what is in store for the rye whiskey and what MGP is quite frankly known for. Let's get into that. Part 2 coming soon on the Cartel Hour, guys. And you can always find these and every other product from MGP and other brands that bottle MGP, all available at caskcartel.com. Be sure, if you're watching this on YouTube, to click subscribe, follow us, leave a comment if you like the episode, and we'll do this again.
Yeah.
All right.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you, David.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. Thanks.
The spirits consumed on this show are available at caskcartel.com. They are America's largest online premium spirits marketplace. You can follow us on social media at Cartel Hour, where you can find information about upcoming episodes as well as the free spirits giveaways we do quite often. And if you're a spirits brand that would like to come on the podcast, please email us at host@cartelhour.com or send us a direct message on Instagram. Our theme music is by Verified Picasso. Thank you everyone for listening, and remember to always drink responsibly and in good company.